So, my name is Jeff Walsh. I am moderating tonight's mayoral forum. You'll hear about priorities, decision making, and how they would approach some of the key issues facing St. John right now. My role is to guide the conversation, keep us moving, and make sure each candidate has a fair opportunity to respond. Sorry.
You got my vote. Vote for Walsh, vote Walsh, vote Walsh.
Sure. So I think the idea was to have you sitting here.
Okay, perfect. Yeah,
Just
I thought so.
that way, like the two candidates are kind of splitting center.
Sure.
And
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
So that's what Steve, the broadcast keeps going to one of them thinking they're.
Yeah, no, totally makes sense.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
I was going to say, that was your book.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was told the wrong one.
Oh my God, you know what? It's so funny. My husband, my first husband, how good
Send this. If I do a really close up, where's this? For the Wednesday photo.
So, Sean, he's just checking the incorrect mic. Do you want to raise the mic?
So we'll try it again. The goal tonight is simple, to give you a clear sense of how each candidate thinks about leading the city as a whole.
Are you changing spots?
Yeah, they moved me.
Oh, they moved. Okay.
Yeah, I thought the idea was moderator here and then the two candidates want to drop down to two. So that it's,
Oh, I see.
I do feel more comfortable.
Barry
that's
was
what I
like,
talked with Liam earlier.
okay,
So.
yeah.
Okay, great.
Barry, we've had to move your moderator over, so Donna Reardon will be sent. What's it supposed to be? No, it's just an audio thing. We're not going to have any trouble here at all. Kwe. Bonjour tout le monde. Welcome. My name is Angela Campbell, and I have the absolute honor and privilege of being the executive director of your Imperial Theater. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, yeah. Thank you so much for joining us today for this important civic dialogue. I want to start by acknowledging that Imperial Theater is located in Menequesc, which we colonially call St. John, which is unceded and unsurrendered territories of the Wolastoqey Nation. We share this region with the Mi'kmaq peoples and also the Passamaquoddies. We're grateful every single day to be able to live and work and create in this absolutely beautiful space. This is a space where people from this community, people from across our great nation, across Turtle Island and from around the world, come to share stories. It's a space that belongs to all of us. So thank you so much for joining us today and being part of St. John's next story. With that in mind, let's talk about tonight. Your presence and voices are vital as we consider what the future of our city looks like. So what we'd like to do is create a really positive and respectful environment for the candidates and for everyone here in attendance and for those of you who are watching online at home. The moderator, Jeff Walsh, is going to be asking questions pulled directly from the public survey that the Human Development Council shared with all of us. So these are your questions. These are the vital issues that you have brought forward that you would like the two mayoral candidates to answer. So as we go through the evening, Jeff is going to ask a question, and then each candidate will have an opportunity to answer. So we encourage everyone to listen. Let the candidates finish their full sentences. We want this to be respectful and to have an opportunity for everyone here to hear what the candidates have to say. Okay. Thank you so much for your cooperation in making this forum a respectful and meaningful conversation for all of us. So, would you please welcome to the stage Randy Hatfield, the Executive Director of the Human Development Council.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here. Before I begin, I'd like to note that we had expected 3 candidates this evening. Blaine Harris contacted us earlier today to advise that he's dealing with an unexpected medical matter and is unable to attend. We appreciate his notice and wish him a speedy recovery. This forum is part of SJ Votes 26, a community effort led by the Human Development Council and our special project Civic Tech St. John, a community and volunteer-based organization applying technology for social good. Our goal is to encourage civic engagement and voter participation in this year's municipal election. Over the past several weeks, residents have shared their views through a public survey and a series of ward forums across the city. Those conversations have helped shape tonight's discussion and the issues you will hear this evening. In recent municipal elections, voter turnout has declined significantly in St. John, which is one reason we believe efforts like this matter. Local government matters deeply. The decisions at City Hall shape our neighborhoods, our roads, housing, recreation, public spaces, economic development, and everyday quality of life in our community. And increasingly, municipal leadership is about more than services and budgets. It's about how we respond to growth, affordability pressures, homelessness, inclusion, newcomer retention, climate resilience, and how we build a city where people want to live, work, stay, and belong. Tonight is an opportunity for residents to hear directly from those seeking to lead St. John through our next chapter. Thank you to the Imperial Theater for hosting us and to the many community partners who helped make this possible. It's now my pleasure to introduce tonight's candidates, Donna Reardon and Barry Ogden, and our moderator this evening, Jeff Walsh.
Well, thank you, Randy, and good evening, everyone. Once again, my name is Jeff Walsh. I'm the publisher of SJ Today. It's a daily community newsletter here in St. John, and I'm thrilled to be moderating tonight's mayoral forum with you tonight. The goal this evening is quite simple. It's to give you a clear sense of how each candidate thinks about leading the city as a whole. You'll hear about priorities, decision-making, and how they would approach some of the key issues facing St. John right now. My role is to guide the conversation, keep us moving, and make sure that each of the candidates has a fair opportunity to respond. We're aiming for a respectful and focused discussion, and I'll step in from time to time to keep things on track and make sure we cover as much ground as possible tonight. So we'll move through a series of topics based on public feedback, as you heard, and the issues coming up most often across the city during this election period. With that, I would like to begin with asking each candidate to briefly introduce themselves. So maybe Barry, we'll start with you.
Good evening. Welcome to the gem of St. John and the nicest uptown in all of Canada. I'm a candidate for mayor. My name is Barry Ogden. I was an educator for years, involved with business, and I guess you would call it a community activist / coach. I want to make St. John stronger. We have some great things happening with our port. We're probably the only city in the country, maybe one other, that has a river system on the ocean. We have some great advantages. We also have some things I'd like to see us work on, things I've worked on all my life. And I think I can make a difference. I've never missed a council meeting or a committee meeting. And I'm always been present and available, approachable, and people tell me I'm a go-getter and I'm genuine. So that's me in a nutshell. Thank you, Barry Ogden.
I'm Donna Reardon, and what I'll say about myself, I guess, is that I started my volunteer career years ago. I live in the Uptown. I've been here 40 years, bought my house in '85, had 4 kids. They all went to St. John the Baptist School, and that's when I really began my career as a volunteer. So I volunteered at the school, I volunteered at the church. There was a time when I had 4 kids in 3 different schools, was on 3 different SPACs. I got onto the DPAC eventually. And John McKenzie said to me, you know, when we finish with the DPAC, we should run for municipal politics. And I said, what? I can't see that. Anyways, time moves on, come to a crossroads in my life. My youngest was in middle school. And, so I thought, I'm going to throw my hat in that ring. And in 2012, I did that. Got on council in 12. I was on with Mel Norton. It was a big sweep of a change that year. And then I was on with Don Darling in 2016. And I thought, am I done or am I going to keep going? So I thought, you know what? Don decided he wouldn't run again. And so I threw my hat in that ring and was elected in 21 as the mayor. And so here I am. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. Thank you.
All right, thank you both very much. Not on council, but I would like to introduce a motion. Maybe we just stay seated for the rest of the evening. My knees are just not good, so I can't.
Okay.
I do want to open the night at a high level. Donna, first question of the evening is, what is the single biggest challenge facing St. John over the next 4 years, and why?
We've got a few challenges. I'll start by saying that what we have done is, you've always heard that St. John needs to get its fiscal house in order, and that has happened. So on the first council I was on, we fixed the pension plan, which was just over $100 million in debt. Excuse me. We changed that from a direct benefit to a shared risk pension plan. With the next council, it was the structural budget that we needed to look at. And then with this council going forward, we've had to judiciously spend our money as we start to put things back into place. We did a significant cut in the budget. So going forward, I think there's a couple of things. There is homelessness, and that is a challenge for the city. It is Some people think we've never had homelessness, but you have. You've had homelessness, but you're not in the numbers that you're seeing today. And it is critical that we advocate for that, to get rid of homelessness, of how do we fix that. So I think we have a couple of roles to play with homelessness and for the city. And then the other thing for us would be, I would say, service levels and safety in the community. And that's defining the service levels, the cost of service levels, the KPIs for service levels, and then measuring those time over time to ensure that you have continuous improvements.
Barry, what do you think is the single biggest challenge facing the city right now?
Well, what I hear at the door, and I've been doing a lot of doors, is safety and cleanliness. People are feeling afraid, and people tell us that the city needs to be cleaner. When you stand at the door for a little longer, they'll talk about homelessness. And I kind of look at that in two ways because I've been with the food banks for decades. And we have a generational poverty issue in St. John that has been around a long time that really never got fixed like it did in the 60s, partly because of the change in the structure of the provincial government. And so we're still dealing with that and the homelessness, which is partly a national issue because the feds in the provinces get out of public housing in the early 90s. It's funny, I lived in Rockwood Court, and the city built Rockwood Court in the 40s. And we need affordable housing. And that is the key, is affordable housing. And it is a national problem. And with it come a lot of other things. But you also hear we need to reduce our property taxes. But I'd say right now what I hear the most is probably people are feeling afraid. There's a lot of people who have a lot of time for people who are homeless, and they want us to do something right away. And I would say St. John has a tremendous number of volunteers who are working on it, and sometimes I think we're not working fast enough for the public. So I would say those are issues.
So we plan on digging deeper into both of those topics, but I want to keep it high level for a minute. St. John's mayor, we know that the mayor of St. John can't govern alone and only votes in case of a tie. How would you, Donna, use the office to build support on council and get results from staff and other governments?
Well, with that, once you get your new team, then my plan would be what I did with my original team, is to meet with all of the team members, get to know the team members, and then try to pull that group together into a team. And it's all about relationship building, and that's all part of leadership. So it's having the relationships with staff, which I have, because I've been there so long. But it's also working on those relationships with the provincial government and with the federal government. When you look at, we've got 76 projects in the hopper for capital projects for 2026, 50% of that will be paid for by other sources, and that the provincial is one of the biggest partners. So you need those relationships going forward, and with the federal government as well. And so I've got those relationships, and you just need to continue to work on those because you can leverage those to get what you need for St. John. And so that's usually the best plan of action.
Barry?
Well, to get something done on council, I kind of look at people who say, I'm going to wipe this out or I'm going to do this. You really need 6 votes. And so you do have to build consensus. And there is swapping going on if you support me on this. And that's the side of politics people don't like. But I brought 4 motions, that what I call structural motions, forward, and they passed unanimously. But I had to sit down with every councillor and explain where I was coming from, because St. John has some structural issues that have not been addressed, that has to be addressed, that will change St. John. And there are some things that we used to do differently with the other 2 levels of government that we have to get back to. So I really think that reason, and I know everybody's laughing because they don't think that politics has any reason in it, because it seems so illogical, but I really think that sitting down with reason and explaining why we need to do this, we got homelessness thrust upon us, and we were coming out of COVID. So every day you get up, you kind of wonder, what's the next move? So you got to be flexible. And so you've got to work with people you can trust, and you've got to work with people that are really open-minded about, and I think people have come really a long way in talking about poverty in the city in a good way.
What is the change, Barry, that you would make at City Hall when it comes to how the hall communicates or consults or makes decisions to improve public confidence as the mayor moving forward?
I don't think we do a good job at communications at City Hall. I think we really got to change that. And I'm a guy who's out on the street all the time and active on Facebook like all our councillors are. And I find sometimes I'm giving out information I think the city should be giving out. So I don't think we do a good job at communications at City Hall. Whether for good or for bad, that's what I hear from people.
Donna?
Read me that question again, will you, Jeff?
What is one change that you would make when it comes to how City Hall communicates, consults, or makes decisions to improve public confidence?
Consults, we do, I think, a pretty good job. We put out for the budget, we start in June with Shape Your City. We do have Shape Your City, so we do that. You know, the council kit comes, it's well packed with the information that we need, but I think we do need that communication component. And councils recognize that, and in the 2026 budget, there's another $100,000 that has been added to the comms button, or the comms budget for, because we recognize that, all of us at council. It was one of the things that when Kevin Fudge asked the team, you know, what do you see as a council? What are your, you know, what do you see we need? It was communications was one of those things. So hopefully that will help to solve that. So that'll be an investment in the website as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and staying with, you know, public confidence, as we heard in Randy's introduction, the last municipal election turnout was just 35.4%. So major decisions are being made by a relatively small share of eligible voters. So Donna, what do you think is driving that, and what should be done to increase civic engagement in our city?
I think to a certain extent we have, you know, voter fatigue. You know, it isn't that long ago we voted federally, and just before that we voted provincially. So I think there's a bit of that going on as well. And I don't know if on the ground and at the municipal level, because we aren't parties, and I like that. I don't want to belong to a party, but you know, because we aren't parties, we don't wear the stripes. I'm not sure that people have that introduction to the candidates as well, and what they really are, what they stand for, what their vision is, et cetera. Whereas when you're voting for a party, you kind of know that ahead of time. So I don't know if that's part of it. And I think the other thing is that we're in difficult times right now. We're seeing the cost of living rising. We're seeing everything rising. And I think, you know, people have other issues on their minds other than, you know, who will I vote for the mayor's position or the councillor position. So that's just, you know, what I think is probably part of what's happening.
Barry, do you have any thoughts on improving civic engagement?
Well, I think part of it's hope. Like, people right now really do want a better world, even though you don't want to watch Fox News or CNN News in the morning. But I think people do want a better world. And a lot of times, I find that if you engage people to do a specific task, that then they understand that, and then that builds into more knowledge of where they fit and purpose. One thing I did as a coach and a teacher that I found when I've had people who are homeless, I hate the word homeless people, it's like saying learning disabled children, they're children first, well, they're people first, is that I've worked with people and I've asked them, like I had 2 guys last year, 6 weeks, and I said, what is it? And they said, we don't have a purpose. We don't feel we have a purpose. And I'm hearing that a lot, but I heard it teaching and coaching too. And I think there's something that instills in you when it happens in life, you just sort of take off. And I don't know if we're missing purpose, if we're missing misunderstanding, education, but we do have a very low turnout here, 35%, which is really one of the lowest in the Maritimes, and that's troubling.
Following up on that, like, what do you think, how do you think residents should be able to challenge or appeal decisions when they don't feel like they've been heard? I mean, we talk about low civic engagement, but a lot of times when people kind of stand up for something, sometimes they can feel like maybe they haven't been heard by council. Is there anything that you see as a fix to that? How residents can feel more at home with challenging and being a part of the system and how things work? No, you can continue.
Oh, okay. Well, we could actually have longer council meetings, and we've had some long ones, but it does get really, really long at night, and then people are limited. I had people that were mad because they came to some sessions, they didn't get a chance to speak, and then they couldn't get any more time off. And they said there was too many people speaking, that type of thing. So there's that challenge. I guess I'm a person who's out in the ward a lot, so I do hear a lot of things. And I feel that that's my responsibility. I'm always around, and I do hear from a lot of people that way. And I find I met with 4 people today about Sims Corner. They're afraid that we're gonna build a huge bridge across Sims Corner, and what people were saying about it was, that's just what they heard. And so I went to their house and explained what was gonna happen. It's gonna become a national trade corridor, and it's needed.
Donna, how do you think residents should be able to challenge or appeal decisions when they feel they've not been heard by the city?
Well, I think the way you're heard is through your vote, for one thing. So you vote for a candidate who will then represent you and make those decisions on behalf of you. And I think if you want to be engaged, then you get in touch with the person that you voted for. So each ward, and there are 4, and I'm sure everybody here knows that, 2 councillors per ward and 2 at large. So, if you used your own 2 councillors and you called your at-large councillors, and there's nothing to stop anyone from calling any councillor or the mayor, if you feel that you want to be engaged. When it's time for those decisions, there are public hearings for some decisions that we make, and then for some other decisions, we put out Shape Your City, and we look for public engagement. So we continue to do that to try to engage the public as much as we can, and then take that information that we gather and put together the plan, the budget, or whatever it is of where we're going.
Let's move into something people feel more directly day to day, and that's taxes and whether they're getting their fair value. Many residents say that it's not just the level of taxes that concerns them, it's whether they're getting fair value in return. Some outer wards in particular have expressed that they feel overburdened while facing large area service challenges. So Donna, how would you improve residents' sense that they're getting fair value for their municipal taxes?
Well, I guess with that, again, it's another communication issue. And, I'll sometimes hear that myself. I'll hear that, more things happen within the uptown area than they may happen in the outer areas. But I will say that St. John is 315 square kilometers. That's huge. So Moncton, Fredericton, and St. Andrews can fit in our footprint. And so that makes a big difference. You have 600 kilometers of roads. That's 1,200 lane kilometers for plowing and for repairing. And so, like I said, the peninsula is about 2.5 square kilometers, but we have about 1/10 of the population. So when you look at who's subsidizing St. John, it's actually more the peninsula because of the density. So what we're doing is we're driving for density. We have what we call the primary development area, and that's where we prefer to have developments. And that would be like having a ring drawn around your city where you have water, sewerage, roads, sidewalks, storm drains. That's where you want your development. But you do have development outside the area. And while people will say that if they live a little bit farther out of St. John, they don't get the services. But what they have is they have roads, and roads are a service. And roads, I look at the budget, my budget's like $205 million, 66 will go to public safety, fire and police, another 52 will go to public works and transportation, and out of that 52, about 23 million goes to roads and road cleaning and sidewalks, roads and sidewalks, snow repair, all those sorts of things. So that's just over a tenth of your budget. So roads are a service, but I don't think people recognize them.
Barry, how would you improve residents' sense that they're getting fair value for their municipal taxes?
Well, recently I've done a lot out east in St. John, and I've talked to people that I grew up with because I lived east and west, and the big thing is the conditions of the road, the traffic on Loch Lomond Road. You know, and you're trying to encourage density because density lowers taxes. Detroit, Winnipeg, St. John have what they call the donut effect, where everybody moved out of the center of the city, and that raises taxes. Our tax is around 1.5, and I think Fredericton and Moncton around 1.3, and that's, I think our goal is to match that. And this council has done a good job of bringing taxes down, property taxes down, but it is partly based on sprawl. And when I'm out East St. John, everybody's talking about how narrow Loch Lomond Road is and how bad the roads are. And when you think about amalgamation, which came right after the tax change, which worked against St. John, the parish of Simons was at it, and that was very rural. And that's probably where the worst roads are. And so I'd say if you look out there, roads are in bad shape. And I must tell everybody, and I've got a whole bunch of calls today, the asphalt plants are open. So hopefully by tomorrow morning, there will be no more potholes.
So in follow-up to that, do you think with the different needs in the various parts of the city, should every ward expect the same level of service, or do those needs differ by geography?
Well, I'll tell you something about the old North End that people tell me. Our sidewalks are crappy. We have asphalt sidewalks. And we spend a lot more money on concrete on sidewalks, and that makes long-term sense. But if you take an 85-year-old woman living on Victoria Street, she doesn't want to hear that she's going to get a concrete sidewalk in 5 years. So that's one thing I fight for a lot, is that the North End is a walking community, and they need their sidewalks fixed tomorrow. So I would spend more money on asphalt on sidewalks, which is a lot less than I would on digging up a whole street for concrete, because the difference is huge.
Donna, broadly speaking, do you think every ward should expect the same level of service, or does it differ, the needs, by geography?
Well, I think it does differ by needs of geography, and it differs by density, it differs by tax base. And so I think this is another communications issue, is you need to manage the expectations of your community. And you know, so you need, like, so, and I do believe that right now, as we try to increase density, there are neighborhoods that maybe don't want a 4 or 6 story apartment building, but if those go into those neighborhoods, then, you know, you add more sidewalks or you try to add amenities. So where you see growth and where you see density happening, you want to try to augment that with some of the quality of life issues as well. So I think there's a trade-off for those things, and I think that communicating that out to the public is important.
I want to switch gears a little bit. Housing and homelessness, of course, has come up consistently in public feedback, so I do want to spend some time here. Barry, first question is about the city's Housing for All strategy from 2024. It, of course, has commitments around outreach, shelter capacity, housing supports, and, of course, the green, yellow, red zone framework. How do you think this strategy is working so far, and what would you keep, change, or improve as mayor of St. John?
Well, first of all, I must commend our council on taking on housing, because it's not supposed to be a municipal thing, but it is. And if I was mayor, everything that happens to St. John, I'll be involved with. So housing is an issue. I like Marcel's LeBrun's bridge housing, where we have set up 4, 3 of them are on Thorne Avenue. And I know that cleaning encampments, and we've cleaned up hundreds, is when you clean up an encampment, you think, this would make you mentally ill living here. And it's not always drugs. So I think these places that we're opening, they have security, they have supervision, they have a common kitchen. And one thing that was meant so much to me, but cleaning up encampments, they have washer dryers. And some of those things are the basic needs of life. And if you don't have the basic needs of life, I think you would have huge issues. So I think we've done a good job with the bridge housing, but that's not the end. We have to keep pushing housing, and people know after a while, in politics, you've got to make things a priority. And, you know, like we had 39 deaths. And if that doesn't hit home, then there's something wrong. So affordable housing is something we just have to go into. And I keep hearing we're building beautiful housing, but people can't afford to stay in them.
Do you believe that the strategy is working as it stands now? Is there anything you'd modify?
I think you can always do more. And I tell you, as I can speak, I think for most counselors, we all go to bed with this at night. And, you know, we're all human, and housing is a human right.
Donna, how do you feel about the strategy so far, and is there anything you'd modify or change?
I think the strategy has been good so far, and I think that you have to remember, as the saying goes, we're building this plane as we fly it, and so that's basically what's been happening, and we'll observe that as we go through it. And you know, for homelessness, I mean, I've gone to a couple of sessions on homelessness to learn more about homelessness, and you know, for every person that's homeless, there's probably that many reasons. And you know, I always think about the crash in 1929 when the Depression started. I mean, there was wealthy people that ended up with nothing. So we're all like a curveball away sometimes from, you know, being homeless or having these sorts of issues. So, and when we look at that between homelessness and shelters and affordable housing is probably about 5 different lanes of housing. And what St. John is trying to do is really just focus on transitional housing. But in those other 4 or 5 lanes, there would be housing with wraparound services depending on the acuity of the person that's going into the facility or into the housing or into the unit, whatever it's going to be. So with us, all we're trying to do is work on transitional housing, get you out of a tent, get you into a small unit, you know, maybe then get your whatever you need for documentation, and you know, work on the things that you need and move through the system to get to affordable housing. So I think it's working. So far, so good. I mean, we've been criticized. We've been told that, you know, those small little 8x8s that we've provided are, you know, closets. I've heard all kinds of things, but nobody's dying of frostbite in those. So I think it's working for what we have, and we built those with money from the feds and money from the province. So, you know, that's our advocacy role as a city as well. So it's, I think we're on the road. Will it morph into different things? Most likely as we go forward. I think it's, you know, learn as you go.
Do you think there's a metric that, as the strategy stands, there's a metric that residents can see success from? Like, is there a metric that shows that this strategy is working?
Well, I guess I'll say that we know that we've put together 54, we've got 54 units, and we just put the bridge housing in. Now we just moved some people into bridge housing, but we have people in there, you know, and so there's about, I think there's maybe 13 spaces that are available right now because of some of the transition into bridge. But so if people are in there and are functioning in there, then is it working? I would say it's working. At least you have that many people that are not in a tent right now. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, just moving them along through the continuum.
Barry, do you think there's a metric that shows that this strategy as it stands is working?
Sometimes I wonder if we're not far enough along yet to do the measurement, to now analyze it and do the statistics. But I do see fewer tents at times. We are responding faster. We just opened our 4th bridge housing. And I think that attitudes are changing. We can't build housing fast enough. I guess when we see people be success in life and find purpose, that's when we'll really know. And that gets me into the next step is affordable housing, but also post-secondary education, which we in St. John are far behind Moncton and Fredericton. And that's something that I would like to see us go after more.
staying with homelessness for a moment, some parts of the city currently carry more of the visible impacts of homelessness and service demands associated with it, and of course the affordable housing and et cetera, than other parts of the city. So Barry, how would you create a fairer citywide share of responsibility for supportive and affordable housing?
Well, part of it's where the services are. South End has 3 vulnerable neighborhoods. My ward north has 2. And North End is a walkable community, and so is the South End. But it's where the services are. I worry that sometimes we've concentrated so many services on Waterloo Street. I mean, you do it in a positive way when you create critical mass, but you can create critical mass that works to the negative. You know, when you build ghettos, you gentrify things. And I worry about that. Maybe can we spread the services out? I mean, it's the whole point of when you get kids of different classes and everything to go to school together, it breaks down barriers. But I do sense sometimes as they and we, and I think if people intermingle and get to know each other better, but people are afraid in St. John right now. There's a lot of people afraid.
Yeah, and I did want to touch on safety, but Donna, do you have any thoughts about how some parts of the city carry more of the burden of homelessness than others?
And that's true. And with that, it is, as Barry said, with the amenities tend to be there. So how do we mobilize those amenities to a certain extent and to bring those amenities to people where they need them? And that's where we need to continue to work with the province. And then the services that are being used, we should be looking at those services to see who's using them, when they're using them, why they're using them, and then can those services be off-site into a better facility, or can that be exchanged somehow? I mean, the services are all grouped together right now, and it's basically for survival. I mean, there's not, you know, and I'm not saying that anybody that's working, you know, in that whole field is not strategic. It's just that it is what we have based on the money that we have. So we need to continue our work with the province because there are mental health issues, and mental health issues that should be with health, and then you have addiction issues. So if we had like facilities or something available to people that required those services, then they wouldn't be all gathered in one spot. But we're just trying to provide what we can to keep people alive from one day to the next. You know, we've got Fresh Start out there. I think they're up over 600 outreach, you know, that they're doing. So they're, you know, everybody's busy and trying to do their best.
You mentioned earlier that, you know, we all could be just a curveball away from experiencing something like that. And we've seen an increase in new housing units in St. John, but for many residents, affordability remains out of reach in general. What do you think the city can do, Donna? And what would you do as mayor to help ensure that more housing also means more affordable housing for people who might be just on the brink? Well,
the city, like we applied for and got the Housing Accelerator Fund from the federal government, and then we got another 10% of that. So we got, you know, $9 million, and then we got another $1 million, almost $1 million. And so we've put together some incentives for housing and some incentives for the affordable components of it as well. So, you know, that's what we're trying to do. And if it's affordable, like you know, what is it that we can do? Can we help with some of the not design work of that, but of the structure work for water and sewerage? Like, how can the city, you know, make a contribution? How can we partner with those, with builders, whatever, to get that affordable component into the development?
Barry, is there anything you think the city can do, or what would you do as mayor to help ensure that more housing also means more affordable housing in general?
When I put projects together, I sit down and break everything down into who can I get to do what. And so I figure, like with the city, we can offer land, we can offer water. I mean, that's partly where Thorne Avenue comes from. You know, we had the amenities and such. So I looked for ways you can partner things. Because if you just go to somebody and say, solve my housing problem, it's not going to happen. And if you go to ask somebody for too much, you'll get turned down. So you got to sit down and analyze and work out a whole scenario of how you can get as many partners into a situation as possible. Now, I commend both the province and the feds have recognized this, but they're looking for partners too, and I think we were successful because we were ready to step up at the plate, even though people say, that's not my lane. I don't buy the not my lane thing. If it's going to affect St. John, if I was mayor, I'm going to be involved with it in some way, negative or positive or whatever. We're not going to lose any more in the city. So I think what you got to do is go and try to offer something and then say, this is what we need, and if this can happen, then we can make it happen. And I think the city has to look at what it can give. And I think part of one of the reasons we got ahead of Moncton and Fredericton on this is we've been dealing with more generational poverty than anybody has. And we've dealt with it for a long time. It's partly based on the tax system that we have that was introduced in 1961 that has not changed. That's why the industrial tax is so important. Last year it was 7 million, times that by 65, and you're into the hundreds of millions of dollars that were taken, the wealth that was taken out of this community. And we're starting to see the repercussions of it. So when we talk about homelessness, I also talk about generational poverty.
Jeff, I was just going to add to that. Just for context, I was up in Fredericton, I don't know, I think it was in March, and there was an announcement, $300 million for 1,200 units, affordable housing. That's $150 million from the federal government, $150 million from the provincial government. So that's for 1,200 units. The budget for St. John is $205 million. So we can't build affordable housing. You know, we just don't have the money to do it. So this is where the advocacy role of the city comes into play, and the partnership role of, you know, land or whatever that we can do going forward. But, you know, at that price, can't do it.
Right. So maybe you can speak a little bit further on what steps you can take as mayor, leading a council to build that advocacy and to push for the opportunity to offer what the city has.
Well, I think when we look back, the city asked for, you know, a provincially led strategy, and you know that was one of our asks, and it wasn't long after that you know, a ministerial committee was put together to look at that. And so I think that's huge. And I think with the partnerships, is like I said, you know, with the land, whatever we can do, however we can support affordable housing, however we can support with our grant, you know, we've put all sorts of grants in so that St. John's built on rock, so if you know, for rock breaking and whatever, so that we can get more apartments built and in neighborhoods. And so I think there's that real partnership, as well as and I think we just have to keep advocating, because we need to have the province with us. We need health with us as well, and we need, you know, to move this forward. And you know, people have said, I mean, the provinces they've got they're frying big fish as well, with a $1.3 billion deficit coming up. So it's difficult times, and we're in uncertain times right now. I'm getting on another subject here, but so I think I think there are the two big roles for us: is advocacy, big time, and partnership.
Barry, any particular strategy you would employ to?
Yes, I would start to educate the bureaucrats in Fredericton, both at UNB, who controls UNB St. John, and the bureaucracy, because when amalgamation occurred, and before that they took over our tax system and our educational system, all the power went to Fredericton. And one thing I've heard from Susan Holt, and I'm hoping she'll follow through, is to decentralize, because St. John is so different from the rest of the province. For the longest time, we had this Victorian industrial city inside a rural province, and with two small cities that are now, Moncton's growth rate is 4 times that of St. John, Fredericton's 3 times. There's an anomaly last year because of the Next Gen project at Reversing Falls, the JDI project. But if you look at those projections, we're going to keep falling behind because of structure. So Susan Holt has said that she wants to decentralize the province. She said one of the ways out is through post-secondary education to raise our whole province up. And the lowest place with post-secondary education, Moncton and Fredericton each have around 13,000 university community college students. We have 5,000. So here's the logical place to score to win big, is in St. John. Get our industrial tax, And those types of things, and structurally, we can change St. John. We beat ourselves up at the food banks and everything. Can we feed everybody and everything like that? But we're fighting in a system where the structure is working against St. John. And we need to educate those bureaucrats in Fredericton, because sometimes the politicians can tell you everything they want, but if you don't have the bureaucrats on side, inside UNB and inside the government, they're not listening.
Barry, you've mentioned the industrial tax quite a bit, and I know it's something that you've been speaking about throughout your campaign. Maybe we dive into that just a little bit, and you can just give us some more information about your strategy.
Well, last year it was $7 million, and you times that by 65. When Jim Irving came to council about Sims Corner, we asked him, would you keep your industrial tax here? He said yes. So people in the past would say, well, no, the industry don't want their taxes raised. Well, right now, that might be a fight down the road or whatever. Maybe it's not a fight. But right now, I want those tax dollars to stay in St. John. And when he said that, I felt really good. And now, when people are starting to realize how important post-secondary is, if you look at the Scandinavian countries, the amount of money they put into education, and they have very successful economies. You also lower poverty rate. So to me, we've got to do more with education. And we have a community college and a university, they're both controlled in Fredericton, yet University of Moncton, St. Thomas, Fredericton, Crandall, and Mount A are all controlled in their own communities. We don't have that control in St. John. I think we're sitting at a golden place, and I think if I hold Susan Holt to her word, she seems like a person who listens, that if we can solve those 3 or 4 things, we can really make St. John tick.
So specifically about the industrial tax, so what would the strategy be to increase that?
Well, if we got it tomorrow, the first thing I think you'd hear people say is lower our property tax to at least where Fredericton and Moncton is. And yes, we should do that. But we also, because that puts more money in people's pockets for groceries. But we also have a recreational system that's really gone down the tube, and we have roads. I was out standing on the street corner the other day, and one guy pulled up next to me, and he points at the pothole he was over. I said, I got the message. And so this time of year, we do have potholes. We don't have them in February, but we do have them this time of year.
Donna, do you think there's anything is there a strategy that you would have as mayor to help advocate for more of the industrial tax here in St. John?
This is my baby, my friend. So I'll give you a little tutorial on this industrial tax. So the last government gave us industrial class. So what we do is the province assesses the buildings, everything in St. John, that's done by the Service New Brunswick. St. John sets the tax rate. And so the rate right now is $1.53.50 per $100 of assessed value. And so for anything that is not owner occupied and lived in, they pay, and everybody talks about the dual tax in New Brunswick, the double tax system. They pay a municipal tax and they pay a provincial tax. So now that we have this class separated out, heavy industry, what we've said is because we are the host city for the majority of heavy industry in the entire province, and because we live with the risks that heavy industry brings. Yes, heavy industry is great for your community. It does bring jobs and lots of things, but it brings lighting, and it brings dirt and dust and noise and train whistles and trains and backs up traffic. So these are all the quality of life things that can make heavy industry in your community not as desirable a community as a community without it. And the Gardner-Pinfold report, which was done for the Don Darling Council out of Halifax, demonstrated that if you have heavy industry in your community, your residential tends to move out of your community and into a community that is more 100% residential. So for that reason, there's 33 communities in New Brunswick that have some component of heavy industry. We're one of them. And so what we have done, the team has done with staff, is put together a tutorial. We offered a tutorial to every community that hosts any heavy industry. And for the ones that couldn't make it, I emailed them, I called the mayors and said, look, you know, this is the differential on the tax for your community. You know, we're looking for your support. Can you send a letter if you're comfortable with that? And so the province was getting letters coming in to say, we would like to keep that portion of heavy industry in the community where it's generated so that we can create the quality of life projects to counterbalance what industry's bringing for risks, et cetera. So if we had that money, yes, we would make an investment back into your roads, because if you have heavy industry, you have the 18-wheelers on your roads, and that's difficult and hard for your roads. But you would also do things like, when I think of the west side, you would invest in Dominion Park Beach, and you could say, this has been brought to you by heavy industry with their component of tax. Heavy industry is on board with it. It means they'll pay no more tax. Their tax will just stay where it's generated. And so that's the strategy that we have employed, and we have asked the government to consider our requests. We've had the other communities, I don't know if they've all written, but I know they have received quite a few letters, and they are also asking to keep the heavy industry portion of the tax. So that's, right now the province is doing tax reform, and they claim that they will be looking at the whole scope of tax reform. And so that would be including looking at the heavy industry tax issue, looking at fair assessments, looking at fair taxation, et cetera. So that's, so I've been working on that for the last 5 years.
And do you think...
Thank you.
Do you think there's any strategy to further advocacy as you continue, if you were to continue as mayor?
Well, yes, I think that, I think for us now is the province is going to come out with tax reform, and so they've promised us that. So I think the next step will be to see what comes back on that and then go from there. But I mean, I've worked hard, this team has worked hard on that, and staff's worked hard on this as well. So, you know, we're hoping that that will be a go for the city, because it's only fair. And right now, nobody wants heavy industry. You're hearing about, you know, in Tantramar, they want to do this, and other places. Nobody wants heavy industry in their community. But if there was a gain for the community, if there was something, then, you know, I think it would change the narrative on heavy industry from being something that communities don't want to being something that communities would want. It's part of the social license to operate at the end of the day. Only the money would come. It would just be the money that's gone to the province. It wouldn't cost the entities, the industry anymore.
Barry, do you have any further thoughts on the industry tax before we move on?
Well, I think the next election is going to be decided in St. John, Tory or Liberal or whatever.
You're speaking provincial?
Yeah, I mean, Higgs flipped the government and ended up with a whole bunch of MLAs here. Susan Holt flipped the government, and it's because St. John changed. So I think we have to speak with one voice in St. John, and we've got one of our jobs, and that's what I see as one of my jobs as a counselor, is to educate people, show up everywhere. I'm on the streets all the time, but I'm also in St. John all the time. I'm really available. And my heart's in St. John. I want to see St. John do well. So if we get everybody sort of singing the same song, and then the province will look at us and say, well, that's what St. John wants. And that's nitty-gritty politics. How do we get elected in St. John? And I think the last two elections have shown, if you want to win the provincial party, I mean, Conservatives do well in English rural New Brunswick. Liberals do well in French rural New Brunswick. We're no longer a rural province. We're a southern urban province. And the place that has suffered the most is St. John. Our wages are lower, our benefits are lower, our growth rate's lower, our educational level's lower. So if you want to play games in St. John, if you want to play balls with us, we want our tax dollars. And that's what you have to fight for, and that's what I'm willing to do as Mayor of St. John.
Excellent. So I do want to get back to city growth in a moment, but first, we had started on homelessness, and I wanted to move into some public safety issues, which of course mean different things to different people when it comes to public safety. It's a major concern across the city. People often, like I say, mean different things when they use that term. So Donna, maybe you can tell us what public safety means to you, and what one action you would take as mayor to improve it across the city in the next 4 years.
Well, what public safety means to me, I guess what we do at the city is we contract to the St. John Police Force to provide those policing services to us. This year in the budget, it's $31.9 million. And what's happened over these 5 years, I guess, since I've been on and been the mayor, is that we're looking for, and things have changed because the situation has been fluid. When I was first elected in 2021, it was defund police. And so here we are in 2026, we need, more public safety. So, you need to be, we need to respond to that. And so what we're saying is what we've done, we've handed that off to a commission. We have a commission that looks after that, and I do sit on that commission. But now we're looking at how do we have input from council, and how do we have more input from the public, and how do we understand what adequate policing is, how do we define that, and how do we create a mandate for police. And so that's really where we're looking at going for the next steps, of how do we refine what we're doing and how do we create that. And those mandates would change, I would think. They would be fluid as well, depending on what the climate is at the time, because like I said, in 2021, it was different than what it is today. So that's sort of where we are with that. We recognize that public safety is an issue, and we want to do something about it, and we want to have that input into it.
Barry, what does public safety mean to you, and what action would you take?
Well, part of it is police. Part of it is just the perception. I hate it when people say, I'm afraid to go to whatever street. And it bothers me. Waterloo Street used to be the second busiest street in the city. My mom worked on it. And now it's got an image that I don't think is fair. But anyway, a group of us on council got together a few weeks ago and said, we've got to do something major with the commission. We had a divide. We decided to come together and say, basically, the commission has to change. We give them $31 million, and there's no accountability. And the other night, I was at a session, and there was one police officer showed up, and I said, because I get calls when something happens, and I respond. And I said, what, one police officer? He said, Barry, there's supposed to be 10 on tonight, there's 5. I said, does this happen? He said, Barry, it's been going on for 5 years. So we have a large number of police officers out every night, which costs the taxpayers anywhere from $2.5 to $5 million, which is not fair to the taxpayer. So we've got to solve that, and I think we will. I think we'll come together and solve that. Some people are for, some people are against the commission, but we need just more accountability. The other thing about when we hired those people to walk around the streets, it worked in Fredericton. It's sort of more eyes on the street and everything. But it's also, when Center Care was closed and Dr. Roberts, a lot of people said we're putting people on the street that can never take care of themselves. And I think we still have people out on the street that can't take care of themselves. So mental health is one thing. Mm-hmm. Drug addiction, the province just opened a drug addiction place in the peninsula. I'd like to see the Workmen's Compensation Hospital that's been empty for years, right on the outskirts. Maybe that could be our mental health institution. I would be assassinated 3 years ago if I said we need maybe a mental health institution. But I think there's people on our streets that are at all levels.
Well, yeah, so I mean, Donna, you alluded to a mandate for police, and Barry, you're kind of in that ballpark. So do you think the city should invest more in enforcement, more in prevention and supports, or just like finding the balance between them, Donna?
Well, so what we actually have done is we've hired Govern Edge to do a review of what we're providing for services and the governance of police. So that's the first step. So we've hired that. That report is just coming back now. And so what we need to do is to dive into that report, and then we need to action that report. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the first things that we need to do. And then for us, we did put the community safety team on the ground, and we're going to pay $800,000 for that over 2 years. It will provide 24/7 service, 2 people on every 12-hour shifts, just going through the areas where we know we have some issues, and to make sure that, those issues are looked after. So they don't carry a gun, they aren't police, but they're trained in de-escalation, and they know when to escalate to police. And then we've also put some money into a grant for cameras and fencing and lighting that businesses can apply for as well to try to alleviate some of that as well. And we do know we've got our first numbers back with the community safety officers that are going around, and they would have been hired probably in January and went through a bit of training, et cetera. And so we've had our first report probably in early April maybe. And what's coming back is good, you know. It's so that investment is a good investment, and so that's one of the other things that we've triggered as well to try to, you know, get a little bit of a handle on this. Crime rates are down, but I think there's the narrative out there as well. So,
Barry, what do you think? Should the city invest more in enforcement, prevention, and supports, or finding the balance
We've got to
of
get our
both?
police department straightened out. It's a mess. And as mayor, that's one of the first things I would take on. And I'm not a shrinking violet. I don't mind standing up. We've got to get that straightened out. We've got to get the city cleaner. But if somebody's shooting up in the middle of the street, they got to be carted away, because that new Steepleville apartments where you're going to have seniors and children, where there's a daycare there, I'm sorry, but we can't have people exposed to that type of behavior. And the theft is up. And I had a SUV full of tools recently that my SUV was broken into, all those windows are smashed. And I live in inner city too and everything. And I was really upset, but it happened so quickly. And that's just not fair to the people who also live in the city. And so we do have to find a balance. And I'm not adverse to, you know, when I see, I've heard, and people who are homeless have said to me, the drug dealers just come to our places right away. Well, I think we should arrest them right away, the drug dealers.
I do want to stay on the idea of day-to-day experience for residents, but through a different lens. So, Barry, what would you say as mayor, what would you do as mayor to make accessibility a more visible and practical priority in St. John?
Well, I got a lesson the other day from the guy who's putting our website together, and I'm not Mr. Technology. And we put a video out, and he said, "Where's the words?" I guess kids today all watch their videos with the words. And I said, well, I never thought about that. And he said, well, it's accessibility. There's a lot of people that need the words for accessibility. And so I'm constantly, at a thing I was at in the North End, a lady pointed, she said, she went like this. And I said, what are you doing? She said, that's what stops me from getting down that street. Your curb is this big. And I thought, you know, we're really trying hard to have the curvature so you can take a wheelchair up. But she showed me, we were planting something on Main Street, and she showed me this is missing this. And she said, that stops my mobility all day long. So, and she was a tough lady, because she said, I want you to deal with this today. And I said, well, it's a Sunday, I'll try tomorrow.
Donna, what would you do as mayor to make accessibility more visible and a practical priority in St. John?
well, I think, you know, whatever we do for accessibility impacts everyone, and it's better for everyone. And you'll see that what's happening is as we introduce accessibility into St. John, it also becomes part of the code for going forward. So we just did a lot of the curbing around King Square and some of the uptown streets. When you get to the intersections, you'll feel that tactile surface. So you'll know that you're at an intersection, you'll see that, and so that gets ingrained into your code. You know, as we add walk signs that have the voice as well as the sign for the hand or walking, I mean, that's two different triggers for people. That helps everyone. So it's all those things, but we just add them in as we move through that. Now, as I said before, St. John is 315 square kilometers. It's not going to happen overnight, but we are, as we redesign and redo roads and sidewalks, et cetera, we're adding in those components as we go forward. St. John is tricky because of the hills, and to meet code, if you want to put a ramp in for every inch a ramp goes up, it should go out by a foot because that's the required slope. So it's difficult to do in some of the uptown. In some of the uptown, you just don't have the space. So you'll see smaller ramps that have been provided for some of the stores as well. But we are, like I said, trying to build all of those accessibility amenities into codes as we go forward.
And if we have time, we will. We still got a bit of time ahead. We'll get to some audience questions here shortly. I want to continue on accessibility. Transportation, of course, can be a major barrier to employment, appointments, community life for those with disabilities. Are you satisfied, Barry, with the accessibility of St. John Transit and other transportation options in the city? Is there anything you would improve?
Oh, there's always room for improvement. It's endless. I must say, one of the things that I really starstruck over are those little flex buses that can travel all around. And when I talk to people, they're a bit of a godsend. I know that, you know, when we buy buses or whatever we do, we keep that in mind, but it's hard to change everything that was in the past that was not accessible. Now you want it to be accessible. And there's, you know, we're trying as best we can, but we have to keep it foremost on our mind.
Donna, any thoughts on transportation and accessibility in St.
Well,
John?
all the buses would have, we only can buy the kneeling buses today, so they would drop down to the curb for that accessibility. They all have a ramp that can be flipped out. Now, if you're in a wheelchair, then that ramp will be put out. If you're getting on with a stroller, I don't know. The struggle with transit is that freedom is frequency. Frequency is freedom. So you want your bus to be on time. And, you know, so you have to be cognizant of that. So we do have, like I said, they are all kneeling buses. We have the small flex buses. We have the accessibility transit. And so you can call and you can book that, and it can take you from A to B, whatever. So and we've just got a new bus for that as well. So I think it's pretty good, personally.
Okay. Barry, by the end, if you were to become mayor, by the end of your term, how would residents know that St. John has become a more accessible city?
Well, more people can get around. I think part of it's safety. I would want to be known as that we cleaned up St. John and we made it safer. That's accessible. Every time we build something, we have to make it more accessible. It's just like my little lesson on the website. I mean, it's not just physical accessibility. We take calls all the time for people who say, "Well, I'm in an apartment and there should be an elevator here." But we do keep that in mind, and that doesn't help anybody if you say we're building new. But that would be, I think, part of accessibility in St. John is just moving around safely and knowing that you can move around.
Donna, how would you show residents that the city has become more accessible during
Well, it's
the term?
something that we continue to work on. And I'll tell you what, one of the big things for accessibility for everybody is it's snow on the sidewalks. And so we've ordered 4 sidewalk plows for this year coming up. So that'll be a huge lift. There's only about, I think, maybe 60% of the sidewalks that are plowed currently. So as large as St. John is, that's another big lift. So that would be something that I think we could really change going forward, is that.
I want to shift into growth.
I want to add one more thing,
Sure.
Jeff, if you don't mind. This is controversial, but what we've put in are active transportation lanes on Main Street. And so if you look at that lane, we've gone from six lanes for cars down to 4. So we've reserved 2 lanes, and within each of those lanes on the outside is a lane for cyclists, but there's also a walking lane there, or a lane for strollers, wheelchairs, and it's a lot easier to move on wheels over pavement than it would be on a sidewalk, because a sidewalk every so many feet is cut, and they can lift over time. So that is perfect. And what's happened with that street, with Main Street, some of the other things that have happened on there to increase accessibility is I walk that in the summertime. It's a short walk from the uptown to the north end. But when I would go, if I was walking up along the side, if I was going north and I was on the right-hand side, I would have to cross the off-ramp onto Station Street, the on-ramp from Station Street, the off-ramp to the thoroughfare, the on-ramp from Paradise Row. It was very dangerous, but now you'll see that that's all been changed for accessibility, and there's lighting on that road now. You have to come to a stop off of Paradise Row. There are buttons for people to push so that you can stop the traffic to cross the on lane onto the thoroughfare. So that's all increase in accessibility for everyone as well. And that works for me. It works for everyone. So it's great. It's great. Thank you.
Barry, do you have thoughts on active transportation in the city?
Pardon?
Do you have thoughts on active transportation?
Yes, if I was mayor, I would narrow the bike lanes on Main Street. I've had so many people say to me, when they're driving down Main Street, they're too close, the cars are too close. I never thought about, we think about the bike lanes. Anyway, a lot of people are afraid, so if it was a little wider, and the speed bumps, which we get a lot of calls about speeding, last year the speed bumps were an inch taller. We got to go back, if we're going to build more speed bumps, to build the smaller ones. Like, if you talk to the service stations, cars are scraping out. I always say, you're speeding, but the thing is, when we put them up an inch higher, it is creating issues with people.
I want to talk on that.
Sure. Speed cushions.
Speed cushions. So those speed cushions that we have installed are within the range. So they are not too high. They are within the range, and we've checked that out. What we do have ordered for them so that they are more visible is like a plastic piece of indicator that it would be, and it would have to go on with a little bit of heat. So that has been ordered, and they will go on them. But at the end of the day, we had in the last, can't remember how many years, maybe, 5, 6 years, we've had over 400 requests for traffic calming. So wherever you see speed cushions, that community has asked for them. So it may be inconvenient. And when you look at the ones on Churchill Boulevard, you have all of that density of housing along Churchill Boulevard and the YMCA and all those kids. And yes, they do have some grass they can play on, but if a ball runs out into the street and a car is doing 60, and a lot of the cars they speed, then we know from your grade 11 physics that force equals mass times acceleration, and we know that force kills people. So you have to reduce the acceleration. So I'm very, very supportive of the speed cushions that we've put in because the communities have asked for them. The active transportation lanes, Main Street, when they check that out, the 4 lanes for the amount of cars that are there are perfect. They're more than enough. And they've used the actual lanes that are there. So and the barriers are just inside the lanes on the other side. So the cars have 2 full lanes there. So I personally don't think any of that needs to be changed. It's perfect. What needs to happen is we need to connect it to University Avenue. We need to have we need to provide an option for transportation for people so that no matter what you choose, you feel safe doing it. And what I like about the active transportation lanes is they create equity in your community. Not everyone can afford a car, but you may be able to get a bicycle. And so that's why a city like Copenhagen in the 70s went with bike lanes, is because that city was crashing, they were going broke, and nobody was there. They couldn't afford, the industry was pulling out. There weren't that many cars. They said, let's go with the bike lanes. And now it's one of the #1 cities in the world to live in because of its livability.
Okay, so I do want to shift to growth, where the city is heading and how you manage the pressure that comes with it. So Barry, I'll start with you. Population growth is obviously important to our city's future for economic growth, sustaining services, strengthening community through diversity. But it's also a bit of a challenge because newcomers choose whether to stay based on all of the things that matter when it comes to living in a city, be it housing, opportunity, their experience while here. And I want to know what your thoughts are. Is St. John doing enough to attract, include, and retain newcomers? And what would you do as mayor to improve that?
Well, population growth around the world deals with different ways of population growth. First, we have newcomers, and they can be broken down into refugees or people who have skills who come to the country. We used to look for skills. In the 1890s, we looked for how can we fill up the West, like a lot of Ukrainians. But today, we also have to look at population growth, about maintaining our young people. That's population growth. Getting people to come here when they retire, and I think that's something that we could do better, like Victoria, BC has. But we don't do a good job of attracting young people. And if you attract younger people, they, you know, like if you attract people into the end of their life, their health care costs are higher, and they might not be replaced faster. But if you can maintain your young people, and that a big part of that's education. It's one of the reasons we built the medical school here. We were losing kids who could be doctors, and if you train your doctors here, like Fredericton has 2 bachelor education degrees. St. John has a half of one. So why is it that we have to go away to become a teacher? I experienced that. So if you have more education, you will keep more young people. So we have to look at breaking population down into how can we maintain the people that we have here? How can we attract younger people? A lot of newcomers leave. They get their PR, their permanent residency, and they're gone. And they usually go to communities where there's bigger communities. The word ghetto is actually not a negative word. It was a place of safety for your culture. So they often will go to certain cities that have larger populations like that. So we do have to sell that we have a smaller city, it's quieter, it's safer. And when you talk to developers, they'll tell you safety and cleanliness is a big thing to keep anyone. And that's where I think partly we fall down. But we are trying really hard to increase our population. We're not increasing it as fast as other cities, and we have to do something more. I think at City Hall, sometimes, I don't know who's involved with population growth. I know we have a newcomer center, I know we have YMCA, but when I'm dealing with City Hall, I want to deal with somebody who's in charge of whatever department. I see the same thing in tourism. Who's in charge of tourism? Well, it's a group of us. Well, like, who's the person in that group? And that's one thing I think at City Hall we need to do, is to identify who's going to be in charge of this file and what are you going to do about it.
Donna? Is St. John doing enough to attract, include, and retain newcomers? And what would you do as mayor to improve it?
Okay, I'll just say quickly that my father was one of 10 kids, and my best friend's husband was one of 23 kids. But I don't think anybody's doing that any longer. So if we aren't going to get population growth that way, we know that 80% of our population growth is going to come through immigration. So what the City of St. John has done is we put together a document called Succeed and Stay. And so what we would want to have is a strategy in there of how do we attract people, but how do we also retain people. It's easy to attract immigrants, but it's not that easy all the time to retain people. So we recently transitioned over to a regional strategy, and it's called Pathways to Belonging now. And so that's for the region, and that's parked with the region, and it's parked with Envision. And one of the stretch goals on there, it's not that long of a stretch, I guess, for 2030, is to try to retain 90% of your immigrants, here in the City of St. John. So how do we do that? We do that by making them feel welcome. We do that by making them feel that they belong. And so those are the things that we do. We have over 60 ethno-cultural groups that are registered with the city. We provide money through the community grants to the Newcomers Society, to the Newcomers Center that Mohammed Baga runs right now. And so we put in all of this infrastructure to try to retain our immigrants. And part of that is also we've just rejigged our whole bus system, because a lot of times people who immigrate to this country are used to being on public transit somewhere else. And so you want to make sure that your transit system is working. We've got the main lines now. We've got the flex system, which we've talked about, to create that frequency so that people will use that. So we're trying to look at what is it that, you know, immigrants are looking for in a city. And I know critical mass is part of that. I know having a grocery store that carries foods that would be, that they would use is important. I know having a place of worship is important. So how do we support those things going forward? And that's what we're doing as we go forward. And we're asking the federal government to please consider the immigration policy, because while bigger cities may not be able to handle more immigrants, we certainly can in a city that's 315 square kilometers with about 78,000 people. So we're open to immigration big time.
Barry, I'd like to talk about Sims Corner. It's become both a neighborhood issue and a city building issue as port traffic continues to grow. Increased train and truck movement is putting more and more pressure on an already difficult intersection, so especially for Ward 1 residents and commuters. So I want to know what should happen next at Sims Corner, how urgent it is, and what role the mayor will play in getting it done moving forward.
Well, when I learned to drive, like every West Sider, the test was, can you get through Sims Corner? You went through Sims Corner with your parent before you wrote the test. And so Sims Corner, every West Sider knows it backwards and will tell you nothing has to change because we all know how to get through there. Unless you're from another place, then you think you've gone to some London, England or somewhere. But Sims Corner now, when KC merged with CP, they went from Mexico City to Kansas City to Chicago to Toronto to Montreal. That's 500 to 600 million people. That's the same size as the European Union. Ports were filling up. They realized if they went from Montreal to St. John, they could save 600 miles instead of going up around the Gaspé down through Moncton into Halifax. So that's where that came from. So now, and that was a historic thing in the 1860s. So now that is back, and it's one of the largest corporations in the world, and they have money, and now we've got others like DP World who are huge. They want things coming through. So every time we see more ships in St. John, we're going to see more traffic through Sims Corner. It's a lot cheaper to run on a train than it is a tractor trailer. So they're up to about quadruple the number of trains going through Sims Corner right now. And if you ask the people in Milford and Randolph, they don't know what hit them because they can't get across because we're 8 years into the Harbor Bridge. And by the way, they did the Princess Margaret Bridge in 2 years because the DTI decided to work 24 hours a day, but in St. John they didn't. And that's a beef I have. But if they put another train track in, which they're talking about, I asked the engineers about a tunnel because when you go from Moosehead, you go up like this. So they said the tunnel's out. So they have to build an overpass. And it's probably going to start near the end of Main Street around Hardy Street area and go to the top of Lancaster Avenue because it dips. And then it's going to go to the Reversing Falls Bridge. And I asked the engineers, because this would be a nightmare for every West Sider, are they going to take down the Reversing Falls Bridge? And you wouldn't get a vote in West St. John if you ever said you would. But they said Reversing Falls Bridge is good for 20 years. So they've got to build an overpass. And as Kearney wants to find new customers and not trade as much with the United States, because we know what's happened with us becoming their best friend for all these years. So we have to make more things. We have to find more ports to go to. We're going to have bigger ships. Even the ships that we're getting now can't go down the St. Lawrence Seaway, and that's the opposite of what happened in the 1950s with the Seaway. We lost traffic. So we're going to see bigger ships. We're going to see more traffic come through all of the Americas. We're one of the key ports now. And so we've got to get an overpass built there. And you're going to have to go over the railway. And a roundabout, which we were toying with, isn't going to cut it. You've got to get over those tracks. I would say it's going to take 8 years and $90 million. And the feds are going to have to come up because it's a national transportation. And the province, DTI, owns a lot of that area. They're going to have to be the two key players. And this is not a St. John project in the sense that, oh, there's St. John, you're taking care of. This is a national project that they have to pay for that's going to help the country. And we have to look at it that way, that, oh, we got our fair share because we got Sims Corner. The nation needs us right now, and we should take advantage of that.
Donna, do you have thoughts on what should happen next at Sims Corner? How urgent it is and what the role of the mayor should be in getting it done?
Well, the mayor does play a role in it to a certain extent. Sims Corner, the land there belongs to the province, and so right now you're in, and Barry mentioned this, there is an interesting geopolitical climate right now, and St. John has a real opportunity with the port and with the rail that you have. You have 3 Class 1 railways, you have your local NB Southern that is here as well, and with what's happening. So with all that, you also have an opportunity to be part of Canada's sovereignty. So like St. John in the next 10 years at least, will probably, you'll see a lot of change in the next few years. There's going to be big changes happening. And Sims Corner is going to be part of that change. So right now the port is moving, last year moved about 240,000 TEUs containers, and they want to ramp up to 1 million. St. John is not ready for that yet. There's a lot of logistics that would have to be done for infrastructure there. Sims Corner is all part of that, so that will have to happen. You just had the federal minister, Minister McKinnon of Transportation, in St. John a couple of months ago, and we met with him. I had an opportunity to meet with him. And so that would be a split between the federal government and the provincial government. The cost will be anywhere between $100 and $200 million, and it will be likely a 10-year project to get done. There's all the design work that has to happen. They have to figure out what they're going to do with the trains. Are they going down? Are they going up? Are the cars going over? So all that needs to be worked out. And this is why I'm asking for part of, at this point in time and before this, part of that heavy industry tax, because your heavy industry is going to start ramping up even more. So, you know, these are interesting times for St. John, but there are also huge opportunities. You need to have some courage to grab onto these and to look at them to see what fits in St. John. But Sims Corner is going to be an integral part of the Canada Trade Corridor, and you are going to see big changes there.
Sticking on the west side, the proposed Laurenville data center was, it's already at the provincial environment assessment phase, essentially out of the city's hands at this point. But residents, of course, it was a contentious issue this year. And yeah, Barry, do you feel the residents' concerns around the environmental impact were properly considered by council when approving that zoning change in Laurenville?
To their feeling, no. They weren't happy, and they're not happy now. And I taught a lot of the kids from Laurenville. I went to school with a lot of them, and they have a rightful historical reason not to. In '69, when the power was put there, they were lied to, and when the dump was put there, they were lied to. And I don't know why anybody in Laurenville would trust any government. We have to have. I was a bit of a holdout there for a while because of that. I thought that we delayed it partly because of that. I'm still not comfortable because I read everything I can about data centers, AI, whatever you want to call it. And after you're done reading it, it's not always a good feeling. And so now it's under environmental review. So I tell people, I have to see what the environmental review. Lately, it's been emissions. People are scared to death of the emissions. I talked to a couple people I knew all my life. I went and had a coffee with them, and they said they're worried about their groundwater. Now, we are told that we have enough water at Spruce Lake that they will use, but they're worried about their groundwater. And then there's the hum. And I've read everything I can, because it's in the American news a lot in the American news. And they are tending to go to places that are grabbing at economic development because they need it. And, you know, when I look at Moncton and Fredericton, Moncton's sort of become the federal capital, and Fredericton, the bureaucrats take care of Fredericton. And so what do we do in St. John for economic development? We have very low educational opportunities in St. John, and the province has to come on board to solve that. And our property taxes are too high, and our wages are lower. So there's a tremendous pressure to create jobs in St. John. Tremendous pressure. This new Marigold place in the port, that's a godsend. And we have so many good things in St. John, but I want to deal with the issues that hold us back too. And I have to wait to see the environmental impact on the data center. I did vote for the expansion of the industrial park, thinking that maybe there are other opportunities too. But that's where we are. Will we get any votes in Laurenville? Absolutely not.
Donna, could you give us your thoughts on if you feel the residents' concerns around the environmental impact of that rezoning were considered properly?
So what we did was, before we rezoned, we put together a task force, and the task force met with the Laurenville residents. And out of that task force came some recommendations. And those were that we would, going forward, if we were going to rezone for, as an industrial park out there, that we would outlaw things that were not wanted. And those are things that could have gone into it, into an industrial park, things like a concrete plant, things like an asphalt plant, a metal shredder, those sorts of things. I think there's 7 or 8 different things that we said we will put those right in to the zoning, so that it's part of the zoning as a Section 59 condition, could only be lifted by another council at a later date, or by any council at a later date, but cannot just be eradicated. So we put those in there, and then we had our we did our public hearing, and that took 3 evenings. Over 3 evenings, we did a public hearing. But that is why that's why we put those things in there, so that we could, at the end of the day, are we open for business or not? So if we say we're open for business and we have land that could be an industrial park, and the road out there is built to industrial standards, it's amazing. It has industrial water. We have worked with the Indigenous population to ensure that they are on board with all of this. It's right off the highway there. It's next to Colson Cove. It can have direct access to Birchill Wind. So there was a lot of good reasons why an industrial park could go there. And so I think that, having done what we did with the task force, having outlawed what they didn't want, and then having the public hearing, I think we did that process. And so that's what we did, and we rezoned. That's it. So now St. John Industrial Parks will take the land, and we'll see who applies for land, to purchase land or to lease land, and what they want to do. And so now you have a data center that's interested, and so at the end of the day, that now they have to apply for an EIA, and they have apparently made an application. I think it's fairly significant. I think someone told me it was like 500 pages. But anyways, it is a very fulsome application that has gone to the province. I think usually it takes about, 6 to 12 months for that to come back. So I will also wait to see what comes back in that. And, I know people have talked about coolants. Part of the way you would cool something would be through evaporation. That's not what this is going to be, I've been told. And but that will all come out into the EIA, what it will be. That will have a piped system similar to what I have in my house, the radiators. You fill those radiators up once, and then that's it. You may top them up every couple of years or whatever. And so, if the noise is an issue, then how do they reduce that? They'll have to come back with that. So, there's all of these things they will have to sort out. And then it'll have to come back before it'll be approved. And so that'll be another opportunity there.
So during both of your responses, Barry, you mentioned mistrust. Donna, you mentioned are we open for business or not? I guess a question that a lot of people would, particularly in Laurenville, might be asking is like, how do you start to rebuild trust when residents feel like decisions are made before those proper public consultations begin, Barry?
Well, mistakes were made in the past when they did Colson Cove. I remember being in class with the kids who were moved from Colson Cove, and they scraped the earth and they left a lot of it. They didn't use it all. It should have been reclaimed. Laurenville should have got the benefits. We talk about benefit packages. We're talking about that now. We've put some land aside. But then they experienced the dump, and there were no benefit packages. So we've put a package together now that, what is it, residents would like to have, and we put land aside and all that. But it's kind of like the horse has left the barn here. You know, we're reacting now. We've learned. But building trust is going to be really hard. And we have to see what that environmental assessment, because these data centers are all different sizes.
Yeah, and
we have one in Milledgeville.
I do want to get back to the data center with one more question, but I did just want to touch on that about the rebuilding of trust with residents. And so, Donna, maybe you could speak to that. How do you rebuild trust when residents feel like decisions like this are made before those consultations and before the public hearings?
Well, all we've done is rezone, so no decision's been made on the data center yet. But, you know, Laurenville does have a history of mistrust, and, you know, for good reason. So I think what I would suggest, and what I've already mentioned to staff, and what I think is the right thing to do, is if this is a $2 billion build, and if, say, half of it is labor, so you now have $1 billion, I don't know what the assessment would be, but, you know, if they assessed it for even half of that, and we kept the industrial tax, you know, we could end up with like a $13 million, you know, annual tax income from this one item. And so that money, some of that money, maybe it's 50%, I don't know what it is, needs to be reinvested in Laurenville. So do you build a community center out there? Do you do the beach out there? Like, what do you do to reinvest? And I believe that for any communities, I said that earlier, for the communities that take apartment buildings, you put the playgrounds in, you add the sidewalks. For communities that take whatever they take, they should get a piece or a portion of the taxes back on that, because that's growth for them, it's growth for us, and we want to make sure that it's good for both of us at the end of the day.
So one more question just about the potential data center. ACT-SJ, which is the city's climate action plan to achieve net zero emissions by 2050, pledged to work with industry towards decarbonization. However, the recent environmental impact assessment registered with the proposed data center indicates that it'll be one of the largest emitters in the province if it's approved. So as mayor, how would you ensure, Donna, that large-scale industrial development at Spruce Lake remain consistent with the city's lofty climate goals?
Well, I think for us, I'll tell you, if you've ever watched council or you've ever been to council, we have Samir Yamen, who looks after climate for us, and that guy is amazing. He brings everything to council, and he's got the District Energy Center on the go, and he's always looking at how do we recapture energy, how can we transfer it from the pool over here, the pool over to, to the mall across the street. Like, how do we do these things? And so he's always working on these things. And so Samir would be the guy to put on that job for sure, because we do want to decarbonize. That is our goal. And if we say that that's what we want to do, and then I think we need to look at what's coming in and see if they fit our goals. So that's another hurdle to a certain extent going forward. If industry that comes in doesn't fit with your goals, then maybe it's not the industry for you. So those are the things that we need to examine as we go forward, and we need to have those, I guess we need to have those barriers that we need to reach, or that need to be completed so that you can move on to the next stage of development or the next stage of approvals. But we need to make sure that people understand what we want. And that's in our climate change.
Barry, thoughts on how, heavy industry,
When
including...
the province does the environmental study, they have to be able to say to the data center or whatever, St. John's an important part of this place. It's not just a place that we're going to put industry and not worry about emissions. That we love St. John too, and we have to play a role in that too. But the province has to say, if you want to build this data center or whatever comes there, that it's got to meet certain environmental standards. And everything I've been reading lately about the data centers, they're all over the map. There's claims of all kinds of claims. And so we have to make sure that we do this right if we're going to do it. And it's really in the province's hands right now. And so they have to do their homework. And they have to make sure that coming to St. John, like, would they put it in Fredericton? You know, if they wouldn't put it in Fredericton, then why is it coming to St. John? So I want St. John to be treated fairly. And I would be at the table to make sure that St. John is treated fairly.
Jeff, I'll just add to that is that we do have the community greenhouse gas plan, and we also have the corporate one. Now, the corporate one is the one that we're in charge of, and we can manage that our own. But we've asked all industry, and industry is working on it, but industry is probably not going to reach, new industry, that's different, but industry that you have may not reach the standards that we are looking for. But we have asked for that, and we are supporting industry to try to reduce the greenhouse gases as much as they can. And like I said, it's, you know, we can control our own. We can't control all the industry that we have, but that ask is there, and we're there to support it.
Further to that, what commitment, Donna, would you make to protecting and improving green space in neighborhoods across the city?
Well, green space is important. I mean, you have one regional park, you have 6 district parks that the city recognize, and so we're always making investments in those parks for the communities. So we recognize green space. We're going to plant, I think it's 1,100 trees that we just got. You know, a lot of the city, in the inner city, you don't have those things. Lots of places within the city that trees have been cut down. So green spaces, we understand the benefits to people physically and mentally. And so, you know, we want to make sure that we do maintain our green spaces.
Barry, we know you love flowers.
And trees.
Can you speak to what commitment you would make as mayor to protect and improve green space in neighborhoods across the city?
Well, besides our beautiful marigolds, we planted 4,000 spruce trees, and they're the absolute best tree to plant because of salt and because they're green year-round, and they keep our winter birds. I would plant a lot more, and I would take some of our spaces, and even when we have developers, we want to make sure there's green space there. And green space can be small. Like a report recently came out, CBC said we didn't have any green spaces in St. John, yet we have one of the largest urban parks in North America. And a lot of St. Johners really took exception to that. And I know my parents used to walk us through it, and I still walk my dogs through it. So I took exception to that. You know, CBC hadn't visited Rockwood Park or something. So anyway, but I would build more parks. We've been really ingenious with some of the places we put spruce trees and marigolds, and they do add to a person's life.
Yeah. So we're getting close on time, but I did just, and I did want to get to a couple of audience questions, but given that we're here at the beautiful Imperial Theater tonight, I think I'd be remiss not to touch on arts and culture in the city. So, Donna, maybe we could start with you. What role do you think arts and culture play in the identity and growth of our city, and how should the city continue to support that?
I think arts and culture plays a huge role in the city. You look at this theater that you have right here. I mean, there's lots of events I come to here that, you know, we got a full house here. So I think you need arts and culture in your city. They say that Winston Churchill was asked to cut the arts and culture budget during the Second World War, and he said, well, what are we fighting for then? So at the end of the day, arts and culture we recognize, and the St. John city has a policy of 1% for arts for any building that we do, and we've done that. You see that over at St. John Energy. You'll see that at the transit building. You know, we've asked for that from builders, from developers. It's huge. We've always supported it. We're looking at, you know, doing another arts and culture policy just to update it. And you were the culture capital of Canada not that long ago. You know, I think St. John tends to have the blue collar sort of identity, the nitty, the gritty sort of thing, but it's the arts and culture. I don't know if St. John realizes it, but we've got the best arts and culture really in the province. And tonight, I was just up, thank you. I was just up at the BMO as they look at, refurbishing and reinventing the old courthouse on King Square. And I mean, that will make you the theater district for the province and probably a significant, well, absolutely a significant one for the maritime provinces. So arts and culture, we all need it and we all thrive from it. And it's so important, and I don't know if people even recognize it. Like you've got your sculptures, the stone sculptures. When we did the stones, all the stones. So there's lots. You need more public art, but the little bit of art that we do have, most of it's along Harbour Passage. But arts and culture is huge. I'm a big supporter of the art scene. I was just up to What's in the Box last weekend. So I have always been a supporter of the arts and will continue to be. Thank you.
Barry, your thoughts on how the city can continue to support arts and culture?
I don't see arts and culture in a box by itself. I'm a big believer in sports and arts and culture because it's part of your learning. We don't do enough of it in the school system. Our kids should spend more time in sports and art and culture. It's part of learning, but it's also part of the learning that increases learning, And so we've got to recognize that. I'd like to see a designated theater district with the new courthouse, this place, St. Malachy's, St. John High, all the churches around here. Wouldn't it be great if we had a great big festival in the summer where I'm thinking Broadway or somewhere, but you just went from one theater to another for a week, and we had all these great venues. I still think we have the nicest uptown in Canada. Nobody can compare what we have. But I also, when I think of arts and culture, I also think of that quality of life, which is like recreation that we closed 7 fields down and 2 rinks, and that hurt St. John badly. And so we have to look at that as economic development and quality of life. So arts and culture and sports to me is the quality of life that encourages economic development.
I'll quickly say, Jeff, that if you, that week, Barry, that you're talking about, we get to do that at the Fringe Festival.
Right.
And you can run from venue to venue, and that's really fun. If you haven't done it, do it this year. It's in August.
So as we look at the clock, it appears we do just have a couple of minutes that we can ask a couple of questions from the audience. So if you do have a question, you can raise your hand. We've got a couple of runners with microphones, I do believe. You can.
We're just changing the batteries in the microphone.
Jeff,
Could
I say something?
Sure.
As a former teacher, we experimented with 2-hour classes. These people from California came and told us this is the best way to teach. Not one teacher bought it, but we thought we could never keep an audience for 2 hours. I don't know how you guys put up with us for 2 hours tonight.
Well, if we're quick, we can make it a little bit less. So if you do have a question, raise your hand. Please direct your question to both candidates. Keep it brief so that we can hear from both of them in their response and see if we can get as many questions as possible. So, Andrea, do you want to start?
As someone with Indigenous heritage, I'd like to know what more can you do other than recognizing land and reconciliation for the Indigenous culture?
Barry, you want to start?
Yeah, I taught Canadian history for a long time, and I got into trouble because I was teaching about residential schools and slavery, and the school board came and told me I was not teaching curriculum. And Mr. Nibb, those of you who know him, who helped save this building, called the school board and said, Mr. Ogden has children who are black and Indigenous in the classroom, and he will teach, and you're not to bother him again. That's what an old principal used to be able to do, not today. But one of the things I did recently was I put a proposal into the city to take Fort Howe and take Rockland Road, and because those of you who know the city used to have cars there and houses, and probably you can't do it again because I've asked engineers, but you can turn it into a pedway, and then you go up around, and when you get up to Fort Howe, when the Americans kicked us out, I'm partly loyalist, they kicked out 100,000 of us, and we were Canada's first refugees, but if you were Indigenous, you didn't lose all your rights if you came to Canada. If you were black, you weren't re-enslaved, and Washington and Jefferson re-enslaved their blacks, by the way. But up on top of Fort Howe, we signed a peace treaty but it was a land acknowledgement treaty, just like what was read here tonight. So Indigenous people did not give up their right to the land. Well, one was signed up there. So I think we should make something historical up there so that we can do more, because we have a whole bunch of things we want to do. But we have a historical event on top of Fort Howe where war canoes came to St. John, and British, before the Loyalists got here, signed this peace, this land acknowledgement thing. And I think if we took something like that and turned it into a major tourist attraction that overlooks all the city, Fort Howe is just not a place you go to go on a date. Okay, there's a lot of history up there. But I think that if that was done, that would do a lot for Indigenous, because we don't have reserves in St. John, or people think we don't. We have a large Aboriginal population, but people think because we don't have reserves, there's no Indigenous people here, and that's not true.
Donna?
Artie, I'll say that in 2021, this council was the first, we were the first council to read a land acknowledgement. It was written for us by Graydon Nicholas. And so I think that's important, because in that land acknowledgement, we read that the rights and freedoms were protected in the treaties that were signed. So I think for us, we read that every council meeting, and I rotate that around so that every councillor gets an opportunity to read that. And we're on TV every time that we are at council, so it's always reinforcing that message. I think it's imperative that for any land issues that we're dealing with, that we should always be respectful, and we should always work with the Indigenous community first and foremost to understand what their concerns are, get their approval before we move forward, which we did with Laurenville. We've worked with, I think it was 5 different communities. So I think that's important, but I think it's also the education that we offer through the council as well. I think we need to continue to do that. So that would be what I would recommend as well.
Thank you both. Thank you for your question, sir. Angela, I think we've got time for one more audience question.
Thank you. How would you, I'm big on accountability, and I see a lot of issues with city staff are not held accountable. Well, Mayor Reardon, you mentioned about the bike lanes. Some of those setups are really bad. City road cuts off in the middle of a sidewalk. If there's something that's not done correctly, how do we hold city staff accountable? Because right now, it appears they're not being held accountable for anything.
Well, part of that is what I would say, and I talked about it a little bit earlier, is the performance management going forward. I think that's the next frontier for the city. So it would be, like I said, setting your service levels, determining what they are, what does the public want, the cost of them, but putting in your key performance indicators and then measuring those on a regular basis. And year over year, or month over month, or 6 months over 6 months, whatever it is, comparing back to what your benchmark is and see if you have that continuous improvement. That would be a huge lift for the city to do. And if I'm the mayor, I would need to get the whole council on board for that, because it would mean it would take every staff person we have to buy into that. So there'd be a lot of education that would go with it. The metrics would have to be set up. So, like when you get on council, like not everybody agrees to things lots of times, but that would be a huge lift for the city. It would be a big improvement, and that's really where we need to go next, in my opinion.
Barry, do you have thoughts?
Well, if I was mayor, I would be around everywhere. I would always be in St. John. You could find me. I'm approachable. I'm present. And I want staff people to tell us things that could get us into trouble with the public if they don't agree with it. Like the speed bumps became higher this year because the other ones weren't so bad. So I know what you're talking about, City Road. I drive it every day. And you get the horn blown at you when you try to cut over, because they think, don't you know how to drive in St. John? And I wish I would have known that was there. So I think there's poor communication with our staff to us, and I think there's poor communication between the city to citizens, and we've got to improve that. It's just not working right now. And people say, well, the citizens just weren't paying attention. Well, then that's on us. We've got to make sure that we communicate to the public.
But what you're seeing in changes in your roads, those are best practices for traffic calming. So when we rebuild a road, and that's tear it up and put new water, et cetera, and we reconfigure it, that's a best practice that you're seeing. It may not be what you're used to, but it's a best practice for traffic calming. And that's what we need.
So, we are just about out of time, but I want to give you both just a final word. So, Barry, do you want to start maybe about a minute? Final thoughts to the audience and to the voters?
Somebody yelled out there.
I'm sorry, in terms of public engagement, I just have one last question. I'll be very brief.
Okay, okay.
So NB Power has told us that they don't have enough electricity to supply all of New Brunswick. We'd like to know why the public was not consulted about the massive usage of electricity for a hyperscale data center. And frankly, nobody was consulted about this. People in St. John don't know about this, and New Brunswickers do not know that their electricity prices will go up if a data center comes to Laurenville.
Those are all the facts that need to come back to St. John Industrial Parks. From what I've read about the data center, they will be making 190 megawatts of their own power. And to supplement the power, that is NB Powers that they would be using. You're claiming, I don't know what they're going to be using for power yet. I have to read all of that when all of that information comes back to me. And once we have all of the facts, then it's up to the industrial parks, and that may come to council. I don't know what the process will be, but we'll need the facts first, and then we'll have to move forward with that.
NB Power has committed 200 megawatts of electricity to a data center.
Right, and that's why they're going to make 190 megawatts of their own power to supplement that.
New Brunswickers don't know that this is going to cost them. They need to be consulted.
They'll be making their own power. They'll be generating their own power. Well, that's for them to decide, and that's for them to figure out. That's not for me to figure out.
Industry decide our lives and our quality of living.
I need the facts. That's what you're telling me. I need to hear what Beacon AI says at the end of the day, and I need to hear what NB Power says at the end of the day. St. John is on St. John Energy, for starters, and so that issue, if that's an NB Power issue, we'll have to figure that out going down the road. But I need the facts, and I need to know, what are they making? They claim they're going to make 190 megawatts. You claim that they need 200 megawatts from NB Power. So once we get the facts, we'll have to make a decision. But this is the whole thing about decision making. It's called evidence-based. I need the evidence before we do anything.
Okay. All right. All right, Barry, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, this is too big of a baby for St. John Energy, so it is NB Power, she's correct, that we have to deal with. And we have to make sure the provincial government, our MLAs, are right on top of this too, to make sure that St. John gets the exact truth of what we're dealing with.
Okay, so we are just about out of time. Thank you very much. I want to give you each just a final word. So, Barry, do you want to start with about a minute? Can you do it?
How come you always start with me? Anyway, my name is Barry Ogden. I want to be the mayor of St. John. It's a city I've lived in all my life. I absolutely love. And I would be a very good mayor. I would always be present and approachable. And I do listen really, really well. And you would see me all the time. And I will take your advice, and I'd be a very good mayor, and I'd make you very proud to be a St. Johner, just like I am, and I want to make the city better and stronger. Thank you.
I guess what I would say for that is, if you vote for me, you're voting for experience, you're voting for leadership, you're voting for progress. I said the other day to the CBC, my kids' friends who would now be in their late 30s are starting to come home and come back, and they can't believe the changes. You've seen the progress. You see the cranes out there, the building cranes, you see the cranes on the port. You have to create a climate of business, and so that's what this team has done. And so that's what I want to continue to do. I want to keep the momentum going. I want to keep that positivity going. I think St. John is great. I mean, no, I'm not looking in the rearview mirror. I'm looking forward, and I'm looking to continue. And that's why I think you should vote for me. But I have to say to
Okay, so that brings us to the end of tonight's forum. I do want to thank both of our candidates for being here and taking part in the discussion. I also want to thank HDC for inviting me to host tonight. And remember, this is just one of many other forums that continues until May 11th, so please keep that in mind. Get out and get more information. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Randy Hatfield from HDC.
Wow, that was a fast 2 hours. Thank you to both of tonight's candidates for participating in this forum and for your willingness to serve the people of St. John. And thanks to our moderator, Jeff Walsh. And thanks as well to everyone who joined us here tonight and online, and to those like Civic Tech who helped organize and support this event. We were all in 4 municipal wards over the last week, and we want to acknowledge the support of the Kent Theatre, the Nick Nicole Community Centre, the Irving Royal Fieldhouse, and the Canadian Legion Brand 69. We appreciated the services of Port City Audio Visual Solutions who live streamed the forums. Democracy depends not only on those who run for office, but on those who stay engaged, ask questions, listen carefully, and vote. Whatever your views, we encourage you to take part in the municipal election on May the 11th, advance polls, or on May 2nd and May 4th. St. John is a city with real challenges, but also real strengths and real possibilities. The future of this community will be shaped not only by those elected, but by all of us. Thank you for being part of that tonight. Have a safe evening. Thank you.